So my name is Tess Vismel, and I am a co-host with that gentleman over there.
My name would be Keith.
Yeah, that one. And we are the co-hosts of the Event Tech Pull-Up, and we're so happy to be here with you today. For those of you who need internet, hopefully you have already had it today, but your access point is IMC Internet with no password. But we also need to give a big thank you and a hello to Who Below, that's off to my right and off to your left, for sponsoring our stage today. And they're an event planning platform that is efficient and less stressful for planners. So we want to make sure that you check them out within the virtual platform and the app. Restrooms are out to my left, as well as there is a lovely food trucks outside, and I had a little bit, so I really encourage you to do that. So Keith, what else do we have for today?
And we do want to thank our stage sponsor, which is Haya. They are the online and hybrid events platform that makes events easy for everyone. And again, if you get a minute, please spin back there and take a look and say hi.
And those lovely things on my ears are called headsets. You all have a set as well. Please join us so that we have a silent, engaging experience.
And for those that require or need closed captioning, it is simply on the Cloud Touch unit directly to your left.
Yes. And then the Interprefy app can also deliver for your audio for your session. So if you'd like to choose which language you'd like, you're more than welcome to do so.
Questions can be submitted via the Vivox platform. You're going to go to vivox.app.app on any web browser on your phone, works great, and enter the Tech Talks ID. The ID is 148-174-016. Again, 148-174-016.
So welcome to Insights from Google's Experience Institute, unlocking the value of events and experience.
And throughout history, we've had a lot of really, really famous people that went by one name. We've got Beyonce, we've got Prince, and at this session, we have Panos, who is the co-founder and CEO at Zenus AI. Dr. Panos has 12 years of experience in the ethical artificial intelligence and is CEO and co-founder of Zenus. He has been internationally recognized as an expert in ethical facial analysis with published articles in the Harvard Business Review and the Journal of Marketing Research. And now we will leave it to you guys to take it away.
Have a great one.
Testing. So today I'll be playing the role of the host. It's not about me or what we do. It's all about Ryan, the Google XI Institute. And he will explain what this is shortly. But a few weeks ago, 2 months ago, the Google team invited us to New York first Google XI Days. One of the moments that really stuck with me was there was a Q&A session and the audience was asking questions on the Google team. And I very distinctly remember Ryan answering many of them, and everybody in the audience was saying, wow, that's a very smart person. So no pressure, Ryan, but we have to deliver today. So with this said, let's get started. Tell us more about the Google XI. What does the team does? What do you do? What is your role within? And so forth. Give us an overview, please.
Sure. So the Experience Institute is it's a cross-org thought leadership group. It's not really a formal team per se. There's 4 of us that make up the core group. It was started by a colleague of mine, Megan Henschel, I think about 2 years ago now, and it's an internal and external community. So we have different partners within Google, and we have several partners outside of Google, including agencies we work with, different technology companies, different other sort of users in the industry. And it's been a really interesting way for us to try to break down a lot of, well, first of all, break through our own biases, our own institutional biases and personal biases and blind spots around the future of event experiences, to dig deeper into what those experiences are, what they can do for us as individuals, what they can do for us as businesses, and do it in a way where it's not really attached to corporate strategy or attached to specific events, or attached to existing programs. And it's let us really kind of move fast and experiment. We went through a first phase with a really broad group of people that I think lasted about 6 months, where we did a lot of discovery. We broke up into different groups. We did a lot of discovery on particular questions. We came back. We proposed solutions that we might explore, experiments that we might run, really, and prioritized those things, and then went to work on them. And then the culmination of that was XI Days in New York about 3 or 4 weeks ago now. That ran for 3 days, and it itself was an experiment. We brought in a number of great speakers, a number of great collaborators. It moved between a presentation environment, a presentation day, and a very museum-like day that was curated and allowed a lot of self-exploration. And then a third day where we wrapped up with some co-design, co-innovation workshops. So it was a lot of fun to do. We got to have a lot of really interesting conversations. It was a little bit of a, come down from a big high to come off of that, because we went into it with a lot of energy and a lot of, drive, and we'd been working really closely together. And at the end of it, I think the last day we went and had sort of a smaller group moment, and my 3 main collaborators suddenly were leaving, and I felt very lost. I didn't know what to do, So there was that moment of reintegration back into the world that obviously is important for events as well. So it was like a year of 2 years of great exploration, and then really living that whole thing very physically and in reality. And now we're trying to figure out how to keep that momentum going and keep doing it.
I love that. And by the way, Ryan, trying to get to the show, share what he one of the testing. Oh, way better. Okay, so Ryan came here with one thing in mind: share his knowledge and the team's knowledge with everyone. And I think that's a very cool way of approaching, events. So with that, can you share with the audience, people watching remotely and in person, how do you measure the experience? How do you measure the different objectives and how well you follow through? And any lessons that you learned, positive or negative, of what works, what doesn't work, what people should do?
Yes, the big measurement question. Of all of that discovery, that first discovery phase, and all, it's gone. We're getting mic dropouts at a tech show. Go figure. So, of all those experiments that we prioritized, the very first one was, hey, we need some way of measuring and talking about the success and value of events. So that ended up being something that I'm in the technology pillar at Google, and so I work really on event technology itself. And that was something that was really close to a lot of the work I was doing, so that was a part that I led. And what it came down to, and this was a big part of what I presented at XI Days, was it's very hard to tell event value stories, experiential value stories, and to measure their success, because success looks different to everyone, and events and experiences involve a lot of stakeholders. And another sort of complicating factor to that is, as soon as you move away from things like revenue-facing events, so events or experiences that drive revenue, and my go-to example on the extreme is roller coasters. You sell tickets to roller coasters. Fun is pretty much the value proposition there. But then you go to, how do you have a great event that's like a VP's town hall in a big corporate setting? Those are really important, but they're very far from revenue. They're very far from marketing KPIs. It's not generating sales leads. It's not converting sales leads. As soon as you get away from those 2 big signals, revenue and lead generation, then that story becomes really murky and really complicated to navigate. And what we've been doing is trying to create more of a framework for breaking that down and bucketing the different parts of that and finding the right level, the right fidelity to tell those value stories and to measure the success of the parts of those things that matter So it becomes this, there's no single answer, right? It becomes a very structured way of trying to say, okay, here's how we're going to say we did this thing for this reason and had this outcome at the right level for the right audience, and filling in the blanks with the right values and the right meaning. So it becomes really more of a system of how you talk about it than it is a single metric or a single KPI. Now that said, there are still things we're trying to drive towards and understand. Can we start to look at something that's closer to a quality of experience score? And we're working with different researchers and different partners to try to think through that. Because we know that you can do that on some things, like streaming video, you can measure quality of experience. So there are things that we need to be able to do quantitatively, but they still, by themselves, aren't really a full story. So it's really about how do we tell this really nuanced story in a very succinct, articulate way to the right audience at the right time. Of course, the closer you are to an event, and the teams that deliver it, that story can be really complicated. And it's hard sometimes I think it's hard to reconcile that into something that's very sharp and pointed, so that as you get to an executive or you get to somebody who's a bit further away and has a lot less context about all that nuance and complexity, they still understand holistically what was delivered and why it was important and why we made this investment.
So follow-up, can you give us, I understand that it's very hard to have the same framework for every single situation and so forth, but can you give us a few examples of, we can use the XI days or the different event that you said, we used the survey, we used the tracking solution, we did feedback sessions, something that you were able to take it and summarize everything in a sentence in a presentation, and you went to your executive team and it actually landed, the point landed. Is there an example like that that comes to mind?
It's, I think that's still a work in progress. So as I said, XI days, or XI is where we're starting to take these very ambiguous, very hard problems, take them to the first level of turning them into something much more actionable within the corporate world. And what's happening now is a lot of that is now moving into other work we're doing that is more strategic. It is more tied to, company objectives and organizational objectives. It is tied to funding so that we can, go make investments where we need to make it. And a lot of that really is, hey, we need to measure stuff better and be able to quantify what should we invest and how are we doing. So we're moving into that. XI days, and there was a theme of alchemy that was really prevalent through that. And we did measure a lot of things at it. So to break this down a little bit, the framework that we've been working to develop is called EXPO, Experience, Performance, Objective. It's 3 buckets. Having a multi-dimensional framework is no, great invention. You see this a lot. There's actually something called HEART, H-E-A-R-T, that is a UX framework that you can read about on the internet that was invented at Google. So it's inspired by that kind of thing. So in that experience bucket, we put all of the sort of experiential tactics. Like, this is a tactic. The 2 people on a stage having a conversation. Fireside chat might be one way you talk about it. Then the performance bucket is all those service teams, the space, the technology. It's that ecosystem of tools that enable this thing to happen. And then the objectives bucket are, what are the outcomes we're trying to get? Is it knowledge transfer? Is it transparency? Is it governance? Is it sales? Is it lead generation? All those things go into those buckets. And then what we try to do is look at each level and align it. Is it very executional and tactical on how we execute the event? Then it becomes about measuring the performance of this ecosystem very directly. Was there an incident in the technology, or did the technology perform? Did the service teams provide the level that they needed to provide? So that you can link that level of tactic, the intent, with the outcome through that ecosystem. And then you keep going up. So it becomes more about the overall pattern of we're going to have a conference. Well, that's a bunch of different tactics and then collected together. So that's something that's a bit more heuristic to people, and they know what it is. It simplifies that story of all the 50 different moments that happen in the middle of that conference, but people know generally what a conference is, and you can attach it to those outcomes. And as you go up again, you get to levels where you start thinking about, okay, what is our major spend? What's our yearly spend, year over year, budgets, things like that. And you go up to the next level, and then you're at this executive level of, why do we have events? Why do we have experiences? What are these big values to the company? And one of the things we learned through XI, and we saw a lot at XI days, was belonging is really important. Belonging has quantifiable financial impacts on a company. And I think the number, I'm trying to remember, but I think the number offhand was at a modest size company, it could have like a $50 million per year impact, on I forget what it was, but like not a Google, a very modest sized company. You put that into like a major Fortune 100 context, that's a pretty significant impact. And event experiences are really important to help drive belonging. So a lot of what we're trying to do is create, before we get to that metric, because the trouble we've had in the past is, hey, here's a metric, look at this insight. And people are like, so what? Why do I care? Why is it important? So the first thing we're really trying to do is say, why is this important? Not just to the people, because I think we've been really good at talking about why it's good to guests, but why is it important to the business, right? And to show over time and at different levels how that happens. Now, to look at XI days, what we did there was, again, very like alchemy. So the metaphor was alchemy was sort of the birth of modern science. It was a bunch of smart people trying to convert random things into gold, right? And they would just throw stuff at the wall or mix random things together and see what happened. And over time, that turned into something that had a lot more rigor to it. It turned into scientific method, and it turned into science. And I think that's the corner we're trying to turn with XI, was to go from that, let's see what happens kind of modality into something that it's now about, okay, now we're going to refine this approach, take on more rigor, take on more structure, and really try to turn it into things that are really actionable within an enterprise environment. So with XI days, you could really see that reflected. And there, what we did is we engaged with several different measurement approaches. One was we had kiosks that were simple surveys. So outside of each venue, outside of each talk, or outside of each sort of activation, we let people just have a sentiment score of, did I like this? And there was a whole range of those things. And we got all that data back. And then we also used several different frameworks in planning it. One of them was another agency one of our planning agency, in this case was HOT out of Austin. And they have a framework that we utilized that helped actually quantify that. So a lot of the data we got went back through their framework to get a score on that and let us see how we did across their categories. I should have refreshed my memory on what those scores were before I walked on the stage, but I did not. And then the other thing we did is we engaged another agency called Debut Group that is based in behavioral science, and they conducted a bunch of surveys and observation and kind of did an audit of what that experience is, and then they came back with a whole report. So we ended up with a lot of data on this, and the interesting thing is, I'm not sure it's going to change anything we would do about that particular conference again, because we'll never do that conference that way again anyway. That was just sort of the idea of it. But it's starting to really push us into, okay, the behavioral science approach is really good for helping us understand qualitatively what's working, how can we create gaps and establish baselines. So as we move forward with now rethinking our own event technology stack, that's a baseline we want to establish. Understanding how to capture data more effectively and increase responses through traditional techniques like surveys and kiosks can be very shaped by those observations we got from the behavioral approach, right? That ethnographic approach. We can reduce friction in getting that. And then, of course, we can start to look at other more observational, less intrusive techniques, like the ones you work on, as we go as well, knowing that those have been challenging for us in the past because of privacy concerns, but as the technology evolves, and also the risk postures evolve within corporate America, then there's more capability and more opportunities there to leverage those things. And again, all that starts to feed this much more nuanced story. There's a lot of data. Hopefully we run it through that framework, and we're able to use that to deliver very clearly articulated insights that are structured in a way that they're sort of like always consumable by a broad range of people.
Perfect. Thank you for the context and letting us speak a little bit more insight into the way you have thought about the event and other events moving forward. So let me ask you this. Not everybody here is having the resources of Google. So what are some of the things that we can learn and we can apply in a way that whether you're doing a meeting with 50 people, whether you have a conference with 200 people, or a trade show with 60,000 people, what are some of the things that maybe we can take and universally apply in a way that actually makes an impact? So do you have any lessons you have learned that they're universal?
Well, to go back to some of the core work that XI has done besides the measurement piece, another really, I think, important outcome has been something called the New Project. And this is something that Megan Henschel, our founder and leader, I guess, really helped get going. And the New Project was a focus on improving experiences for neurodivergent event attendees. And if you go to thenewproject.com, THENEU project, PROJECT. So the New Project, new with NEU, you can get a playbook that gives you a great overview of how to improve experiences, event experiences for neurodivergent audiences, right? And there are a number of things we learned there, and we saw this play out at XI Days, where we had a great panel discussion with a neurodivergent panel that are media takeaways. And a lot of it has to do with creating optionality. And one of those things was an option of no options, if you will, right? So the more structure you can put in place is really valuable for particular neurotypes. Other neurotypes want a lot of choice. So it's important to find sort of multi-path approaches where you're able to create a path where I can sort of self-select what I want to do and choose my own adventure, where someone else might say, no, I want a very highly curated pathway through this and to be kind of guided through. So that's a big one. We also experimented with having docents in the event at XI Days. That proved to be really useful. We got a lot of great feedback on that. And that was not just someone who's like, XI Days was an event about events, kind of like this, but there wasn't a commercial aspect with it. It was really about exploration. And so the docents really functioned in this role of helping people not just navigate what the content or the information at the event was, but also just get around this crazy space that we had it at Google in New York. So the docents were really important because it gave people a safe point to go to. Very, very clear wayfinding is really important. And I have yet to see really great wayfinding at any event. And I will put our own events at the very top of that list of needs to improve. So those are big ones. All those things are covered as well in the New Project document, the playbook you'll see. But I think coming off that, those are big conversations we're having about how do we improve these things? How can we do this? But our challenge, as we've talked about before, is that we're not running a dozen events a year. We're not talking about trying to, our group is not focused on trying to improve, Google Next or Google I/O or those kinds of events. Those teams they have their own teams, they have their own cycle, and they know what they're doing. We're trying to figure out how do we improve thousands of events across Google for hundreds of different applications every year. And so it becomes a need to do this very systemically and find ways where we're creating tooling and we're creating like architectural and infrastructure-based approaches to this, where we don't have to, depend on the host or the person who's sponsoring the event to do it, because often they're not trained event professionals. They're just accidental event hosts as we characterize them. So I think that's really important for us to start finding ways to create better tooling and better management techniques and strategies that build this in automatically, right? And they become like just easily executable patterns, or they're just there already. Those are some of the big ones that I think are important to think about, that don't really require. Sometimes people say that they're free, they don't require money. That's not always true, obviously. But they don't require inventing something new. They just require having a different approach to planning and a different approach to the design of the experience.
So with that, I want to go a bit deeper. So in an event, you have lots of stakeholders. You'll have the technology providers, the agencies, the team organizing the event, and so forth. So the question then becomes, how do you bring all of these things together? Because the organization responsible for the event has specific objectives, context that everybody else doesn't have. The agency, the event technology company, everybody has different, we're all coming from different places. And there's limited time, there's limited resources to pull everything together. So how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, the context gap between inside the corporation versus outside and being a service provider, and even inside the corporation and being further away from a core event capability or from a core particular business need, those context gaps are a bit of my own soapbox, because I think those gaps are getting deeper and wider, and they're becoming harder and harder to cross because everybody has so much more information. Events are becoming more complex. The technology around them is becoming more complex. The audiences have more complex needs and expectations. And so all of this is just getting worse. So managing it isn't just about sitting down and having a conversation and laying out expectations. I think, that's sort of the automatic starting point of, well, you have to sit down and you have to set your objectives, and you have to go design a plan and blah, blah, blah. I think everybody kind of knows that. The problem is you can never really transfer enough context from one party to the other. You can't really describe how the company works on the inside, the politics, the dynamics, the policy impacts, regulatory impacts that are on major companies at this point. Those are very, very complicated. And so from the outside, what should be a very straight, logical problem to solve, on the inside is non-viable, as everybody likes to talk about, in the tech world. Non-trivial. It's super, super complicated. And my first observation, or my first sort of suggestion to people, is like, the way you think it works, it doesn't work that way. But I can't even begin to explain to you why it doesn't work that way. It's like physics are totally different. Now, I think from inside the company and looking to an agency, they're like, why don't you just understand what I need? And it's because the agencies are built in a very different way as well, and the technology providers, so everybody's working in their own context. For me, I am lucky or unlucky enough, depending on how you want to think about it, to have worked all over the sort of industry between events and audio-visual technology and broadcast and media and random other things, to have seen all of that and to been in those sort of positions and recognize and be a bit empathetic towards everybody. And so again, it comes down, from my point of view, of to do this. One way is just time, right? Like, you work with the same vendors, the same teams over and over, you begin to build trust, and you begin to build some shared context, but especially you begin to build trust where you just say, one person or the other. Just trust me here. You go with it. People, you move on. But you can't do that all the time. And often, as the needs expand, no single vendor can serve all the needs of a single company like Google. So we're always having to add new people to the mix. So I think part of it is we have to better educate our agencies on what are really critical needs and what are non-negotiables and what are the expectations. And again, it comes down to we have to find systemic ways of doing this, whether that's through tooling, whether that's through playbooks, whether it's through those processes. But it's a matter of getting everybody to sort of understand that you're never going to work with the entire picture. You're never going to have all of the information and all of the data, which is very contrary to today's world of give me the data and I can figure it out. But the insights and the information are what is important, not the data. And I think that's the thing we have to get to, is where the right information is in the right place to the right people at the right time. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a high-tech solution, but it does have to be a solution that relies on some sort of structured, rigorous way of talking about it. We need shared language that goes beyond kind of hand-wavy creative language and gets into something that's a bit more laddered, right? Like you can navigate it and you can drop in, you can get the information you need, and you can get back out.
Perfect, got it. So we are out of time, and we couldn't get into specific numbers and so forth for obvious reasons. But the goal was to get a sneak peek into some of organizations like Google think about events, what they think is important, what is not important, what are some of the challenges, communicating between different parties and so forth, the scalability. Unfortunately, we don't have time to cover that, but if anybody wants, please feel free to come, speak with Ryan, pick his brain, and thank you so much for coming over to Vegas and giving this talk. Thank you all so much. Thank you.